Hey guys, Kirk here, and thank you for joining me on a new video on the channel. This video is going to be the first video of many videos that I'm going to do where we are going to build a game world landscape shader. I do call it a game world landscape shader because of reasons I will explain later. But in particular in this video, what I want to do is just set up a bit of an introduction. I'm going to discuss the landscape shader itself and what's going to be included in there. We're going to talk about the software we're going to be using outside of Unreal Engine to better equip us with this landscape shader. The software I'm going to talk about is free to use and free to download, so don't worry there. And then towards the end of the video, we're going to talk a little bit. Well, I say talk, I mean showcase. I'm going to showcase a little bit of my workflow for anyone who is new to the channel and I'm not sure about my workflow and things like that. I'm going to showcase a little bit of a build up of a function later on and how they work and things like that. Okay, so let's get started with the video, but before we do, I've got one thing to say. I went onto YouTube Analytics the other day. I appreciate everyone that subscribed and likes my videos. It really does go a long way in helping me produce more videos and showcase that the work I'm putting into my videos is worthwhile. But like I say, I went onto the analytics and 70 to 75% of the viewers who view most of my videos are not subscribed. So do us a favour and hit that subscribe button. It is free to do so. And if you do, you get good luck for the rest of your life. I don't know. I just seen that on a short the other day of some child doing... I say child, it was about 17, 18, but you know, I'm a lot older than that. So... yeah, anyway, I'm getting lost in transition here. Please hit that subscribe button, show that support, and help me produce more videos and get me notified and get me out there for everyone to start learning what I can showcase. If you want to furthermore support me and my channel, there is a new donation link in the description. Feel free to jump on there and add 5p, 50p, a pound, £2, whatever you want to do. It's up to you. If you're American, you're going to use dollars, aren't you? So, but yeah, enough of that. Okay, so let's talk a bit about this landscape shader we're going to be making. Like I said earlier on, it's going to be a game world landscape shader. There is a difference. In previous videos on my channel, I've created landscape shaders, but they've been more aimed towards cinematics and maybe advertisement level of detail. With a game world, you only have like 10 to 15% of a game budget to create the geometry of a world and the shader. That's excluding like your set dressing and props and all this good stuff. So you have to build a game world shader which is cheap but also decent quality. That's the challenging side of creating a game world shader, but I really do enjoy it. But obviously I'm doing it to showcase to you guys who are hopefully wanting to build a game world yourself, showcasing how to build a decent landscape shader. So yeah, what things are going to be included in this landscape shader? We're going to be talking about distant tiling. There's going to be 3 levels of distant tiling. We're going to have a near, a mid and a far. A lot of shaders out there will only have near and far because of unknown reasons. It works out a little bit cheaper having near, mid and far, and it does open more opportunities like for advanced UVs and detailed texturing on the landscape shader itself, and it also enables us to reduce the texture quality the further away the camera is, which also saves on memory space for your landscape shader. Which is brilliant. We're going to introduce macro variation as well. This essentially breaks up the tiling repetition on the ground. We may also introduce cell bombing in there as well, which also does the same thing. But I may use the cell bombing stage for something different, like to apply a different kind of texture in between the grass. So we get like grass and then there's like spots of sand or mud and dirt and all this. I'm not 100% sure yet whether we're going to utilise that, but I will showcase it. I'm also going to introduce triplanar projection into this. What triplanar projection is going to do, it projects your texture onto an angle that would otherwise stretch the texture, if that makes sense. So like here in this area where you can see this cliffside on this island on there, because when you apply your landscape, texture to your landscape. That landscape texture is projected downwards on the z-axis, or in other words, a bird's eye view is projected down, and when your camera is facing the cliffside, that texture is then stretched because it's meant to be facing downwards. So triplanar projection will stop the stretching, and I may also introduce a more steeper texture. So what I mean by that is, with our slope texture, our rock texture, I may introduce a different texture what will break up the repetition of that slope as well, but that's dependent on a steeper slope angle, so that texture will only be introduced at a certain angle on that slope. So yeah, is there anything else that I want to include in this landscape shader? There's obviously going to be the foliage, procedural foliage. We're going to use masks for that. I don't mean masks from Gaia, we're going to create the masks ourselves using like a Voronoi or Perlin Noise or something of a grayscale mask nature. So yeah, that's pretty much, not everything, it's just what I could think off the top of my head for this Game World shader. Oh, I'm not sure if I mentioned it, but it's going to be multi-biome as well, and what I mean is everything I've just mentioned, like your macro variation, distant tiling, slope detection, and all this good stuff, that's going to be included in every kind of texture we can paint on this landscape. So you may have snow, sand, grass, dry grass, mud, rock, and all this, and it'll all utilize the logic of the master material itself. So multi-biome is quite hard to do, but it's nice to have on a game world. It just means you could be playing in this area here with whatever you're doing, and then when you go over it might be like sand dunes or something, I don't know, just something I'm thinking of, and that's what multiple biomes is with that. Okay, I want to quickly showcase the software we're going to be using. One of them is going to be Quixel Bridge. As you can see here, if we hit this little plus icon here, we get a Quixel Bridge here, and it's the integrated version to Unreal Engine 5. Don't get me wrong, it's great, but with the Quixel Bridge standalone, you get more control. Like if I click on this mesh here, you can see it's asking me to sign in. I'm not going to sign in right now. You can change the quality here. You have low, medium, high, and then nanite. This will make more sense a little bit later on. So let's jump over to Quixel Bridge standalone and let me showcase what I mean. Okay, so this is Quixel Bridge standalone. As you can see, it's pretty much the same as the integrated version. I feel the standalone version works a lot better, like with performance and things like that. But if I click on the same meshes we did on the integrated version of Bridge, you'll see I've got 2K resolution, 4K and 8K. Essentially, you can see I can't download nanite objects here, but I could like download a 2K resolution texture set for this particular asset. And then in the integrated version of Bridge, which is inside Unreal Engine, I can download the nanite mesh and then apply these textures to that mesh. So I'm getting lower quality textures, but still getting the nanite mesh, but that also saves on performance. In your landscape shader, you could do it another way. You could download the mesh here at say 4K or 2K and then import it into Unreal Engine, and then inside Unreal Engine you can actually convert the mesh to a nanite mesh. That's another route you could take as well. One other good reason to use the standalone version, if I click on a surface or material or texture, whatever, you can see I can select the resolution like normal, which is great. And then this little bar down here, this little group of whatever, it looks like a sound wave bar, I don't know. But if you click on that, you get a download settings, which this will allow me to download whatever textures I want from that particular material. So I can, all these here, I can download all of these. Whereas in the integrated version of Quixel Bridge, you don't have this option. You have to import the material from Quixel Bridge integrated, and it will give you an albedo, a normal map, and an ORD texture for some of them, or it might be ambient occlusion, roughness, and it might have a mask or a curvature or something like that. A texture that you're particularly not going to need. Essentially, with, like I say, with this, you can download whatever texture you're going to need. And for our landscape shader, we're going to be using albedo, roughness, specular displacement, or a height map, both the same thing. Normal map and an AO map, ambient occlusion. If I come back now to the bottom here, I can click this and click export settings as well. You can choose your custom disk export, which means you can export this to a hard drive, which I do, and you can set the location of where you want it to export to. You can also click the textures category up here, and you've got your surfaces, and you can export them particular textures as well. As you can see, I've got albedo, AO, displacement, normal, roughness, and specular for the export if specular is available, which is great. And that, guys, is why I use the standalone version of Quixel Bridge when creating a landscape shader. When I create any project, in all honesty, I use Quixel Bridge standalone. It's a lot more user friendly, if you like. Even though they look the same, you have a lot more productivity using the standalone version. You can go to Quixel Bridge website here and download Quixel Bridge. The link for this, it will be in the description, or you can just Google Quixel and then or use this thing up here, the address. But like I say, the link will be in the description. Another bit of software we're going to use is this one. It's called Materialize. Materialize is one of the most free, powerful tools you can get. It's not got as much notoriety as it should have, but this piece of kit is extremely powerful if you are into texturing and environmental art and level design. It's extremely powerful. Yeah, I mean, with Materialize, I could go outside right now onto the lawn or on the front or to the park or wherever I want to go with my mobile phone or cell phone if you're American, and take a picture of the ground, try and get it flat. But take a picture of the ground. You could go out and take a picture of the road outside and whatever, and just take a picture of it, upload your picture to your computer, PC, laptop, whatever you're using for development, and apply that image to Materialize, and it'll generate a height map, it'll generate a roughness map, it'll generate a normal map, and all these textures that you need from that one image you took outside, wherever that was. But obviously try and get a decent, high quality image. If you've got cameras, use a camera, you'll get a better quality image there. And the better the image, the more quality of a texture you'll get through Materialize. One other reason I use Materialize is because you can actually stack textures in there. So what I do, like going back to Quixel Bridge standalone, I download and export these particular textures that I want to use, and say my AO, my roughness, my height map, ambient occlusion map, and all that. I can upload them and open them in Materialize, and then you can actually stack them textures into one PNG image. So, like I say, Materialize and Quixel Bridge standalone is a must. You don't have to, obviously, but I would highly recommend getting these bits of software, as we will be using them in this series or building this landscape shader. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to jump back over to Unreal Engine, and I'm going to showcase a little bit about my workflow and how I work. And this is solely for the people who are new to the channel. If you've been watching my videos for a while, you'll know my workflow up to now. But for the new people who are just here to learn about creating a landscape shader, this is how we are going to be doing it. Okay guys, welcome back to Unreal Engine. What I want to do is just, like I say, showcase a little bit of my workflow, what we're going to be doing. I'm going to introduce the new guys, the more beginners, to what functions are and how we're going to set this up. So yeah, let's get on with it. I'm also actually going to show you how to apply a material instance to a landscape that's been world partitioned. It's very important, this step, if you're using world partition. Okay, so I'm going to come to my content draw. You can see I've got my folder structure here. If you've been watching the series Build Worlds V2, you should have a similar folder structure going on here, as that's what we've been doing in the past on this series. This landscape you're seeing now, if you're new to the channel, is what I've sculpted by hand over the past few videos of this series. Okay, so my folder structure, I've got important. This holds me level and my HLODs, and it's going to hold my layer infos and all that, all the important stuff for your environment. I have a landscape folder and an ocean folder. This ocean folder is just this plane with a blue material on it, very simple, and it's just indicating to me where the ocean's going to be. I'm also going to build the ocean shader later on in the series as well. So I'm going to open my landscape folder. You can see I've got alpha brushes here. I do give these away for free earlier on in the series, so go back and check that video out. I think it's one of the sculpting tutorials using the sculpting tools. I give these away for free. Here's my landscape shader. Like I say, I've said a few times now, if you've been following along, you should have that old material where we created the basic slope mask to change colour depending on the slope, but I've got rid of that now, which we're going to create our new one. So what we need to do is get a master material for our landscape shader. So I'm going to right click in the content drawer here. I'm going to come to material, and I'm going to use my naming convention, guys. Just a couple of words on naming conventions. It's very important that you adapt your own naming convention. If you're following this tutorial to create a landscape shader for a game, and eventually down the line, a few months, you release this game, this will be flagged up as copyright. So it's highly advisable to adapt your own workflow, utilising the tutorials that you get online, like say mine, and you get mine, and my mate there, MR3D, he does more animations and things. He's got one as well. You've got CG Dealers or whatever they're called. He's a good lad as well. I've spoke to him on emails. All these different YouTubers or different developers have their own particular workflow. I would not advise to copy a workflow, or should I say naming convention, or if you do your landscape shader exactly the same as someone else and then go somewhere with that shader saying you've done it, it will be flagged up. And this is true because maybe 3 weeks ago I did have a message stating that an interviewee has gone for a remote job and they've asked for proof that they know how to be an environmental artist and create a landscape shader, and he essentially just followed one of my tutorials, an old one, and shared that, and they messaged me on ArtStation telling me that. So like I say, watch all these videos online, learn from them, don't just copy them, learn from them, and you know, mix them all up together and create your own kind of landscape shader, your own workflow with your own identity, and you should be ready to go. Okay, moving on from that. So this is my landscape shader master, so I'm just going to call it KM, which is my naming convention for Kirk Materials. Landscape master. Sorry if you can hear my keyboard, my microphone is ever so close to my keyboard. So now we've created our master material. I'm going to right click on this master material and create a material instance of this master. And essentially the master material is going to hold all our logic that we're going to build throughout these few videos. And then the material instance is where you'll be able to open it and control all the aspects of the logic that we put into the master material. So now I've got my material instance. I'm going to click on it and highlight it. And then what I want to do is come up to my landscape. As you can see, my landscape is world partition. If you're not using a world partition landscape, then you shouldn't have this little triangle next to the landscape name. You can just click on your landscape and you'll be able to follow along from there. But if you're using world partition and you've been following this series along, you have to open this landscape and you'll get all these landscape proxies. And just click on your very much top landscape proxy, scroll down to the bottom where your last proxy is, hold left shift on your keyboard and left click, and that will select all the landscape proxies in between the first and last one. In the details panel here, you'll see you've got a landscape material slot. I'm going to scroll this up a bit because when I open this content drawer, it comes right up there, and now I can still see my landscape material. You can see my material instance is selected here, so this little arrow in the circle, if I click that, use selected asset from content browser, click that and it'll apply this material instance to our landscape. If you just give it a moment, the landscape will turn out black. That's normal, it's fine. It's because there's no information in our landscape material master. Okay, so now that material instance is applied to our landscape, we can click away from that. You can see it's a bit shiny. I'm not a big fan of when it looks dead shiny like that. You might like it, but I don't. So what I do first before I start building any kind of logic up, I'll open my master material, and this is where all our logic's going to go inside here. The first thing I'm going to do is click on this output, and then I am, shall I do it now? I'll just do it, yeah. If you hold 1 on the keyboard and left click, you'll get what's called a constant 1 vector, and we can set a value of 1 in here. Just put a value of 1 and drag that into your roughness. Just hit apply at the top left here, and there we go. And you can close that master material down, and you can see that landscape now is all nice and black, but it's not dead shiny. And that's just my particular workflow and how I like to work. What I'm going to do now is save everything. You can come to the top here and click save, and it will save what's called a scene save, or a quick save if you like. But as you can see, I've clicked save and it's gone from 16 unsaved to 2. But if I click on this now, you'll see I've got a Kirk master material and a material instance. And this, when you save it, when you click down here and save it here, it's what they call a hard save. And that's where you just saved everything in your project, and everything's up to date and you cannot change much now. Okay, so what I want to do now is to get some new folders in here. I'm going to right click, get a new folder. First one's going to be called functions. Literally forgot how to spell it for a moment then. And then I'm going to create a new folder and call this layers, like so. I'm going to open my layers folder, right click, new folder, and we'll call this master, like so. We're not doing anything in here, I'm just preparing the folders for when we do later on in these videos. But now I've got my layers folder and my functions folder. This is my kind of workflow, guys. I do use functions a hell of a lot. The reason I use functions in a workflow, I mean, you could open your master material and build the whole thing inside that one material. That's completely fine, but it will be incredibly hard to read. So that's why I use functions, because it makes things a little bit easier and a little bit more compact. So I'm going to open this functions folder, and what I need now is a material function. So I'm going to right click, go to materials, and come across to material function. Using my naming convention of KM for Kirk Materials, I'm going to call this texture sample blend. Yeah, it's important that you name your functions right, so you know exactly what they're doing. What we're doing is blending texture samples together here, and that's why I call it texture sample blend. If you just call it something like, your naming convention, then texture blending, then what kind of texture blending are you doing? It's very important to keep your namings real, if you like. We're going to open this up, and I'm just going to go through a brief thing with functions. Functions are a lot similar to materials themselves. You'll see you get the same thing. You've got more options down here, and this is for your material itself, which we'll go through at a later date. But a material function is the same kind of thing, but it just enables you to enclose logic into a box, which then becomes more presentable. As you can see here, we're getting an error, which is missing function output result. I'm going to change this name of this result. I'm going to call this distance texture blending, like so. You can see I'm still getting the error there. That's fine, that's completely normal, don't worry about that. But now I've clearly stated on my output for this function what is inside the function, which is distant texture blending. What we need now is what's called a texture sample. So I'm going to right click, and you can type texture in here, and you can see here it'll come up with a texture sample. You don't have to use your mouse, you can actually use the keyboard when you finish typing and come up and down on each one of them. There's a shortcut to get a texture sample as well. Hold T on the keyboard and left click, and that'll get a texture sample in there as well. we're going to align these first. Let's highlight them all, Shift and A, and it aligns them. And then we can just move them up so they're a lot more closer together. like so. Okay, so what we need now is an input for this texture sample. These texture samples are going to showcase the same texture. So what we can do to reduce a performance hit on our landscape shader is to change these from a texture asset. So what this means is the shader is going to compute each texture sample as its own individual texture sample. But if I click on these and change them to shared wrap, that essentially is telling the shader that these 3 texture samples are going to enclose the same texture, so not to compute them individually, which is very important. Now on the left hand side of these texture samples you have inputs, you have a UV input and the texture input, and then apply view MIP bias. This is quite advanced, very rare that you'll use it, so don't worry about these. The text and the UVs are what you're going to use the most. And this input here, if we drag off this and just type function, and you'll see we get a function input here. If we click on that, it gives us the function input. And what this function input is, if I right click and just type world align, and get this world align blend. And this is just another function, it's nothing to do with what we're building here, it's just me showcasing what my function is. So this essentially is a function. If I double click and open this, someone's really badly created this function inside here. A lot of stuff's been depreciated here, I don't know why they don't just clean it up, but that's just a personal view. Essentially what this is, a logic inside the function like we was talking about before. And what we've got here are inputs, and that's what these are. These are inputs, so we can see them on the outside here. I'm just showcasing what inputs are. Very useful. In here, what I'm going to put in here is texture input. Very simple. We're clearly stating what this function input is going to do. And then we can drag up, because all these 3 texture samples are going to use the same texture from this input, we can drag this into the TEX input of each texture sample, like so. What we need now is what's called a texture object. The reason we need this is because if I apply this texture sample to the output, I get an error, missing preview connection for function input texture input. On this texture input itself, you'll have an option down here in the details panel, which says use preview values default. Even though it's not selected, it still requires a texture input. Essentially what this means is you can't have a texture sample with an output that has nothing inside it. As you can see, there's no texture inside it, and it just won't compute that way. You can bypass it by just applying the texture outside the function, and it will work. But to stop the error from now, we're just going to create a texture object. To do that, we can click on our texture sample, Control and D, and just duplicate it. You can see this is a vector 3, and it won't be handled by this input. It's a texture 2D. And with it being 2D, that means it's a vector 2. So we need to turn this texture sample into a vector 2. We right click on the texture sample and convert to texture object. This texture object is now classed as a vector 2. And we can simply drag and put that in there. But you can see we're still getting an error. That's because this needs any kind of texture, it cannot be empty. So if I click on the texture here and the details panel on the left, I can get what's just called a placeholder. There's no real meaning of this texture. All it is like it says on the name, it's just a placeholder. It just stops you getting that error. And we just put that in there and you can see that error is gone now. Okay, so that's the input kind of thing going on. What I need, like I said at the beginning of the video, this is going to be a 3-tier distant tiling. So what I need is a way to control the UVs of our texture near to the camera. I need a way to control the UVs of the texture in the middle, and to control the UVs of the far texture. So that's what we can do here with some inputs. If you come off the UVs, click and hold and drag away. And we'll just type in the search bar, just type input, and you can see it'll highlight the function input. Just click on that, and you'll see here that it's changed our input type to a scalar parameter from 2D, which is here. You'll find a lot that when you actually drag off inputs and outputs of texture samples or any other functions, that when you ask for a function input, it will automatically change the input type or output type of that material, of that input function. But you can still click the drop down menu and choose whatever one you want there. But for now, the scalar parameter is fine. So I'm going to call this distance UVs far. Like I said earlier on, the top texture sample is going to be far, the middle and bottom. Separate that a little bit, like so. And what I can do with this dead easily is just highlight it, and then Control and D, and it's going to duplicate it. And then we can just change the name from far to mid, like so. And then I can duplicate this again, and just change that mid_1 to near. And now we've got 3 different inputs for our UVs, and we can just drag from the output of the function input into the UVs of each of these texture samples, like so. Let's just align these up a little bit so they're a bit more neater. As you can see, we're getting a little bit crowded now. So one technique I like to use doing this is this middle one here, this noodle here. Just highlight it so it highlights like that. Just hover your mouse over it and double click, and it'll assign what's called a reroute pin. This reroute pin is just like an extension lead from this output. I can simply click on here and drag a noodle out to that one, and drag a noodle out to that one. And this now is going to better clean up this noodle graph. And now I can put this here, just out the way a little bit, and drag this function input down here a little bit. I'm just going to shift in A and align them, and then move them across. And now you can see that our function input is a lot more cleaner and easier to read. But now we need to blend these texture samples together. So I can drag off this RGB and just type lerp, and it's going to get what's called a linear interpolate node. We don't need that in the A1, to be honest. Oh, I just did that without explaining myself. If you've got a pin in there, like a noodle from here to there, like this one, if you hold left alt on the keyboard and left click on the in pin, it'll get rid of that noodle from there. The shortcut to get a linear interpolate is if you hold L on the keyboard and left click, that'll get a linear interpolate as well, like so. Okay, so what we need to do is blend our near and mid texture samples together. And we're going to do this by dragging from the RGB of our mid into the B input of the lerp, and the RGB of our near texture sample into the lerp of A, or the A of lerp if you like. And then, like we can do before, like double click, and you can just drag these pins away, and it just makes it look ever so more neat and tidy. And it's just a lot more professional for anyone who wanting to get into the industry. Don't know why, but that's just a personal observation myself. Okay, so for this lerp, what I need to do is to create an input for our mask that we're going to create in a future video. So I'm going to get an input again, function input. It's a scalar parameter, which is fine. And then what I'm going to type in here is distance mask near. Right, so. And now we've got our distance mask near. I can just put this under there. We can clearly see what it's doing. Okay, so what I need to do now is blend my distance mid and distance UVs near, blend it with the far. So from the output of this lerp, I'm going to drag this lerp and put it in the A input of that lerp above. And then this RGB from this texture sample, I'm going to put into the B input of this lerp. And then the output of the lerp for our distance UV far, we'll put into the output of our function itself. Okay, let's neaten this up a little bit, make it look a little bit more presentable. Very important you keep your work neat and tidy, guys. Okay, so we need this, we've got this distance mask near input. I'm going to duplicate that, left control and D, and then from here I'm going to change the name of this input. Now you can do it in the details panel here, or you can press F2, I think. Oh no, this doesn't work with input functions, my apologies guys. Okay, so in this one we need to change this from near to global. this is how I'm going to do it, and this is just our global distance mask. It'll make more sense later on in the series when we build the distance mask. So with this, I just need to plug this input into the alpha of that lerp there. So what a lerp essentially does, it blends between the A and the B input based off this alpha, and then whatever input goes in here, it's going to base it off there, which is cool. Okay, that's the build of the function itself. What I want to do now is just to set the priority. And what I mean by priority is if I right click and get that world align function again, like so, you can see these inputs on this function. You get a very much top one, which is XSplit normals. This is what you would use to create a slope blend. I mean, this is the old way of doing it. The way I'm going to showcase is the new, more advanced way. But world align blend is one way to create a slope angle. But anyway, from the top here to the bottom is the priority. So imagine this top one is 0, and then it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You can do that by using these function inputs here. So my very much top one, I want to be the texture input. And here in the material expression, you'll see that you have a set priority. It's already set to 0, so I'm going to leave that. And here at the top, you have a description. Now, this is completely optional. You don't have to do this. But I'm just going to put a little description here just to showcase a little bit later on why you would use a description, but you don't have to. So I'm just going to type insert texture here. Just like so. I'll showcase a little bit later on. So that texture input is going to be right at the top of our function. It's set priority to 0. So the far I want under it. So I'm going to set the priority to 1. The mid is going to have a set priority of 2. The near is going to have a set priority of 3. And then my distance mask inputs, I want them below that. So the set priority is going to be 4 for the global, and for the near it's going to be 5. You can come in here at a later date and change this as well if you want. You don't have to, but you can do. The option is there. Okay, so I'm going to hit apply. Oh, before we move on the details panel, if you click anywhere in the grey space here, anywhere, just click, and it'll open up the actual function options here. So here in the material function, you can leave a description of what this material function is going to do. So I'm going to say it blends 3 texture samples for distance tiling. Okay, you do, like I say earlier on, you do not have to do this. This is just the kind of workflow I do. If I come back to this and when my material is like this big, doing all this, I can just hover over that function and it'll tell me what this does. So it's handy to do that, but you don't have to. Below that, we're going to expose it to library. I'll showcase a little bit later on. It just exposes it to the library here. So yeah, let's hit apply. And I'll just go into the master material again and showcase what we've done right now. Okay, so if I zoom in here, I can't remember if this works. No. Home. I can't remember how you do it, but never mind. Okay, so now we're back in our master material. What I'm going to do, I'm going to right click and just type KM. As you can see, I've got KM texture sample blend. This is because I exposed it to the library, so now I can search for that function I've just made. And if I hover over it, you can see that it blends 3 texture samples for distant tiling. Very handy. Like if I do that, add to break material attribute node here. So I can just click on that, and you can see now we've got our function that we just made, this makes it a hell of a lot easier to work with, which is great. And because we're going to be using an albedo for every texture we're going to use, we'll have to duplicate this. And that's the power of functions. You can create the logic in a function and utilize it as many times as you want. And you can see that the order of the function is set up how we want it as well. Okay, so I think that's enough for this video. I've showcased the kind of workflow we're going to be using, where we're going to be using functions a lot, I've showcased the software we're going to be using and give a description of the kind of landscape shader that we're going to be making. What I can do now is just hit apply and save this, and I can now close that function down. Now I'm going to come and hard save it, but you don't have to because it says it's all saved. So yeah, that's it for this video, guys. In the next video, I'm not sure what I'm doing yet. I've not completely planned out how the direction of this build is going to happen. But if you found this interesting and you're excited to learn more from my channel, then like at the beginning of the video, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a donation if you want. You don't really have to, but you can do. I'd really appreciate it. And I shall see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.